So I have a confession to make. I'm a reformed anarcho-capitalist. Back in high school, I was deeply interested in the Austrian School of Economics. I was fascinated by the rebellious ideas of Hayek, Hans Hermann Hoppe, Rothbard, and Peter Schiff. I was a weird kid, and I read a lot about economics. And for some reason, the Austrian school just made sense to me. I mean, everyone would be more free if there was no government and more corporations, right? Taxation is theft. Nobody should be receiving the money that I rightfully earned. Social Security is a scam. The elderly and disabled should have their families taking care of them. And why do workers' rights need to be enshrined in law when companies would be fighting for your labor under anarchy? And I was far from the only one who believed in these ideas. At the time, I was following several writers and bloggers who wrote extensively on libertarianism, the Tea Party, and this really strange form of anarchy. I was deeply interested in this revolutionary and alternative way of thinking. But one blog I never encountered at the time was Unqualified Reservations. This blog was written by a man named Curtis Yarvin, known by Mencius Moldbug at the time. He was a blogger heavily inspired by the Austrian School of Economics, among other, even more unsavory sources. While we did have similar ideas at one time, one of us decided to read Marxist theory, and the other decided to continue down the right-wing conspiracy rabbit hole. Or to put it into Yarvin terms, he took the red pill, as I re-upped my prescription on blue pills. Yes, Yarvin was the originator of the term red pill, taken directly from the Matrix, and today used by everyone from pickup artists to Holocaust deniers. If you're liking this video so far, I'd really appreciate it if you left me a like, and if you want to see more content like this in the future, go ahead and subscribe. In 2002, before beginning his career in blogging, Yarvin founded a company called Urbit. Urbit was a tech company funded with backing from Peter Thiel, another anarcho-capitalist who has had a long relationship with J.D. Vance, Elon Musk, and Donald Trump Jr. In 2009, he stated in a blog post, quote, "I no longer believe that freedom and democracy are compatible." This sure sounds like a guy who should have plenty of power and influence on politics. Anyways, this is the guy who gave Yarvin a small fortune and the ability to focus on his writing career. Now that Yarvin is a small cog in the machine of the tech world, he worshipped the myth of Silicon Valley CEOs. There's a certain mythos that surrounds these success stories, around the likes of Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk. There's a story of the American dream. These figures have transcended to the rank of mortal gods of capitalism, being able to create trillions of dollars in revenue from the humble beginnings of a garage. They won at life, at least in the American sense. These people are rich beyond belief, famous, and they yield an outsized influence on modern culture. And they somehow managed to do this completely alone. Yarvin paid more credence than the average person to these founding myths. His idols are the CEOs of his favorite companies. They achieve a godlike status in his version of history. In his writing, he continually worships them as fearless and perfect leaders, creating enterprises with thousands of employees under them and leading them into the battle of the free market. In fact, he goes as far as to say that these people should be the ones in charge of our government. Yarvin wants a country where all of the power is put into one central leader. He envisions the state being run by a tech CEO, repeatedly claiming that Steve Jobs should be given authority over everything, back when he was still alive. Quote, "Assuming security and responsibility, how can we produce effective government in California? The answer, find the world's best CEO and give him undivided control over budget, policy, and personnel." I don't think there's any debate about it. The world's best CEO is Steve Jobs. Which would you rather live in, California as it is today, or Applefornia? Which would you rather carry, the iPhone or the Cal phone? I rest my case. Man, wouldn't it be great to have the owner of a company who had to install suicide nets on their factories because of such poor working conditions have complete governmental power? Also, his claim is seemingly that Steve Jobs is single-handedly responsible for Apple. The thousands of employees under him are worthless, the swaths of engineers, designers. This is not to even mention the low-level employees like the factory workers and retail employees. These people have done nothing but carry out the will of their astute leader, according to Yarvin. Yarvin is at the beginning of the neo-reactionary movement, also known as the Dark Enlightenment, a movement that rejects the advances of the Enlightenment and creating apologia for the Black Ages. In a nutshell, the movement seeks to reject liberal democracy and embrace monarchism. But Yarvin doesn't exactly believe in a divine right of kings style of monarchy. What he wants is slightly different. He wants him, his friends, and his idol to rule over everyone. Just as Plato imagined the philosopher kings should be the highest members of society, Yarvin envisions the future as rife with tech bro kings. Or as he states, he's a neo-cameralist. Quote, "Let's start with my ideal world. The world of thousands, preferably tens of thousands, of neo-cameralist city-states and mini-states, or neo-states. The organizations which own and operate these neo-states are for-profit sovereign corporations, or Sovcorps. To Yarvin, this is the ultimate in moral governing, creating a, quote, state that makes billions and increases shareholder value. His version of a utopia is a world that is made up of small sovereign monarchies that are ruled by startup CEOs, where one is free to renounce citizenship from their own country, or company town, and join another at any time. This isn't monarchy, this is just anarcho-capitalism. Because as much as Yarvin wants to call himself a monarchist, he's just using language in a way to obfuscate his unsavory beliefs. Yarvin's use of language creates a cloak of his true ideas. He twists already defined words to create new meanings, and has made his own extensive vocabulary to make his work both seem more sophisticated and nuanced, and also to hide his true beliefs behind pages and pages of text. For example, he often makes the claim that democracy and politics are the same word, but with different connotations. Democratizing something is good, while politicizing something is bad. This sleight of hand trick of the usage of language is extremely common in his work, and if you aren't diligent about reading, it could seem like he has an actual idea somewhere in there. A hallmark of Yarvin's work is its sheer verbosity. His blog posts and books are long, and his podcast appearances are drawn out. He never wants to put all of his cards down at once. He never wants to show anyone his true beliefs who hasn't invested a large amount of time into him and his ideas. It's borderline brainwashing. You have to get through diatribe after diatribe about every little idea he has to finally uncover the truth. He hits you with so many articles, Wikipedia, and YouTube links in every post that you really have to invest time in dissecting everything. And some people really fall for it. They think that simply because he can continue to spew words, he's correct. He spews author after author, historical event after historical event, in order to prove his intellectual superiority, because that's what he wants to do. He wants to continually flex his knowledge on obscure events and crackpot right-wing authors in order to distract and bring arguments that normal people aren't able to refute offhandedly. And speaking of history, Yarvin's retelling of historical events is absolutely divorced from reality. His worldview is weaved through readings of old texts, recounting the events of their time period through a clearly right-wing bias. To Yarvin, this is how you get to the real truth. What we have today is nothing more of stories that happened in the past. The further we get removed from it, the less factual we become on a topic. He thinks that relying on sources of the time is the best way to get history. And he thinks this way because he simultaneously believes that the world becomes increasingly left over time, shifting the Overton window further and further against his worldviews. And this is all done through a giant conspiracy, which he calls the Cathedral. So let's talk about the Cathedral, since it's a big component of his philosophy. Yarvin defines this concept in a Substack post published in 2021, years after he terminated his original blog that gained him so much traction in Silicon Valley. Quote, "The Cathedral is just a short way to say journalism plus academia. In other words, the intellectual institutions at the center of modern society, just as the church was the intellectual institution at the center of medieval society." Yarvin continually falsifies a narrative in which the New York Times are the ultimate deciders of truth and opinion across the world, where the top universities create a stranglehold over all American thought. And the icing on top of the cake? He thinks they're constantly spreading communist propaganda throughout the world. Any Marxist knows that this is patently false. Heck, anyone further left than a moderate Republican would think the same thing. There's so much evidence to the contrary that it seems ridiculous to even debate the idea. Even the suggestion itself of a global puppet master controlling the course of history is an idea that arose out of an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory widely spread by Nazis. I think in some sense that Yarvin is grasping a true issue here, the way in which hegemonic power continues to maintain itself. But he's coming at it through such an incredibly strange way. The Debord book, The Society of the Spectacle, creates what I think is a much more compelling argument. Debord thinks that modern capitalism coerces a dominant narrative through consumption, one that hides the exploitation inherent in capitalism. And on top of that, Debord's idea doesn't include a shadowy ruling class. While we're on the white supremacist conspiracy train, Yarvin also has a number of unbelievable opinions surrounding race and slavery. Like, it's amazing how many times he writes about this topic and still has a serious fan base. But still, he claims not to be a white nationalist, all the while writing about how white people have a higher IQ because of genetics, and that some races are more suited for slavery. Quote, "Not all humans are born the same, of course, and Carlyle, following Aristotle, takes the view that the innate character and intelligence of some is more suited to mastery than slavery. For others, it is more suited to slavery, and others still are badly suited to either. These characteristics can be expected to group differently in human populations of different origins. Thus, Spaniards and Englishmen in the Americas in the 17th and earlier centuries, whose sense of political correctness was negligible, found that Africans tended to make good slaves and Indians did not. The discoveries of Charles Darwin, who knew Carlyle personally, suggested that this broad pattern of observation is most parsimoniously explained, at least in part, by biological differences between groups. Indeed, there is no question that biological differences played a role in Europeans' preference for African over Indian slaves in at least one respect. Due to a superior genetic resistance, Africans were much less likely to die of introduced tropical diseases like yellow fever and malaria. Of course, by itself this observation offers no moral justification for slavery, and indeed Darwin strongly dissented from Carlyle on this point, writing in his autobiography that his views about slavery were revolting. Now let's keep this in mind while we continue on, because Yarvin is a self-professed Carlylean. Carlyle being a Victorian author with such classics as Occasional Discourse on the Negro Question, which is a revised title from the original, I'm sure you can figure out what that was, and advocating return to monarchy, where the leaders of the Industrial Revolution were the leaders of government. Is any of this sounding familiar yet? Hitler and Goebbels were also huge fans of Carlyle, going as far to call him the first National Socialist. So, Yarvin identifies his own political philosophy by the same one that inspired the rise of the Third Reich and the American Civil War. Quote, "I am a Carlylean. I'm a Carlylean more or less the way a Marxist is a Marxist. My worship of Thomas Carlyle, the Victorian Jesus, is no adolescent passion, but the conscious choice of a mature adult. I will always be a Carlylean, just the way a Marxist will always be a Marxist." This is what we're dealing with here, a through and through conspiracy theorist and racist being treated like a modern philosopher by tens of thousands of fans and allies. His ideas appeal to a very specific demographic, white men who feel the world is being destroyed right in front of them by minorities and women, who think they're being replaced and don't want to see the genetic makeup of their bloodline change. And if we're still not 100% confident that he has at least some seriously questionable opinions about race, let's take a look at this. Quote, "It should be obvious that, although I am not a white nationalist, I'm not exactly allergic to the stuff. As should be the case with any intellectual, anyone who takes this as an endorsement of white nationalism is an idiot. Maybe this doesn't need defending, but I feel the urge to defend it anyway." But curiously enough, he's never attempted to defend any kind of leftist thought. He will tout Marx as an abhorrent monster who created evil dictators like Mao and Lenin, all the while continuing to provide links to some of the most disgusting white nationalist blogs I've ever seen. This is what I see as the fundamental shortfall of right-wing politics, a lack of empathy. In fact, developing this empathy is a large component in what I attribute to my political changes. I think that it is a quality that is fundamentally non-existent in right-wing politics. Try explaining to a Republican that universal healthcare should be enacted simply because everyone deserves to be healthy. And then try explaining to them how food and water are human rights. You'll see pretty quickly how rare this quality of empathy is. I mean, if you want to succeed, you should just pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? The right doesn't want nuance in their politics. They don't want class analysis. They certainly don't want things like DEI and the woke mind virus invading their schools. They don't want to hear about these radical concepts that are teaching their children how everyone should be treated with respect. Modern-day Republicans are anti-democracy, and not in a cool anarchist way. They're anti-democracy because they want fewer and fewer people to possess the right to vote. How many times have you seen them talking about voter ID laws, repealing the 19th Amendment, or only giving people the right to vote if they own property? They don't want more power in the hands of the people. They want it to be centralized in the hands of a small few at the top. And when I say all of this, I'm not trying to demonize Republican voters. I think a lot of them have just been duped into thinking that this is what's best for them, and that this is going to provide them with a better economy and more stability in their life. They're being propagandized by these people who want to gain power. Yarvin's view of the world continues to creep ever closer to reality, especially with the imminent inauguration of Trump and his good buddy JD Vance. And you do realize that Yarvin and JD Vance are buddies, right? This essay isn't just me shouting into the ether about a blogger I don't like. This guy has the chance to create serious change in the world. He's no longer confined to the elites of Silicon Valley. He's made it national. In fact, his newest blog posts are a frank discussion on how Trump can make his way to becoming the monarch of America. This is no longer hypotheticals. He's plotting real scenarios in which his goals can be achieved. In this world, where he is in the ears of the most powerful people in the country, how can he claim that the cathedral is still keeping him down? Shouldn't this shadowy cabal government have done something about him by now, if there was such a thing? On the other hand, if all that exists are monolithic megacorporations who would benefit from the transfer of power to a business-friendly monarch, wouldn't everything be playing out how it's being played out now, with a little fanfare? Democracy is quietly executed for the benefit of the few over the masses. This, again, is another loss for the left. And against the ideas of Yarvin, the cathedral will witness this and say nothing, because mass media continues to go with the flow, continue to rake in the big bucks and act as if nothing's happening. This was another part of my turning point into leftist thought. I began reading the philosophy of the Frankfurt School in high school. Again, I was a weird kid. And I engaged with critical theory and capitalism. The analysis of capitalism and cultural hegemony that the Frankfurt School gave me made me start realizing my previously held beliefs, as anyone who calls themselves an intellectual or philosopher should. Not that I call myself either of these. And since then, I've never stopped being curious. I engage with other philosophies on both sides of the aisle, and this is how I've discovered Yarvin in the first place. I wanted to see what contemporary right-wing philosophy offered. That, and I wanted to see the ideas that inspired Nick Land, who will receive his own video. But it's clear that Yarvin hasn't done the same thing. Even with all of the continuing attacks against Marx, socialism, and communism, I'm 100% convinced that he hasn't read any leftist theory. I mean, look at how he categorizes an excerpt he quoted from Zizek. Quote, "The anonymous part of no part, the big other. Listen to this scoundrel, this charlatan, this truly evil man." If you're reading Zizek and this is your takeaway, it seems to me that you aren't nearly as well read as you think you are, and it isn't a flex to not know what you're talking about. He's attacking an enemy that he doesn't know anything of, and he doesn't care to learn. It's as if he's allergic to any theories that he doesn't agree with, but oddly he's not allergic to white nationalism. Weird how that works. Another classic of Yarvin twisting words is calling America a communist country. Quote, "America has no surviving intellectual tradition besides progressivism, which is no more than a synonym for communism. Communism is as American as apple pie, and America today is a completely communist country." Once again, look at his usage of language, equating progressivism with communism. Any self-respecting communist or progressive would be extremely upset with this equation. The only thing that they have in common is that they're further left than Mussolini. And on top of that, his view of history is astounding. He has stated in debates that we went against the monarchs in the Russian Revolution. He thinks that the State Department has had a pro-communist agenda since the early 20th century and uses incredible leaps of faith to continue to maintain this position. He provides debaters with countless pages of decades-old reading material instead of addressing any topics because he thinks he can win through misinformation, all the while claiming that truth should be above everything else. I mean, if only any of these claims were true, maybe history would have worked out a little better for the leftists. And Yarvin certainly is not scared of power. In fact, his whole philosophy is concerned with gaining more of it. In his book titled An Open Letter to Open-Minded Progressives, he makes the claim that, quote, "The tactical error of the libertarian, Rothbardian, or otherwise, is to believe that the state can be made smaller and simpler by making it weaker." Oh, and he also says, quote, "If America wants to change their government, they're going to have to get over their dictator phobia." I mean, at this point, it's completely clear what kind of person he is and what his politics are. Yarvin wants a system of government where him and his buddies are in charge, with unlimited power and the ability to give orders to everyone else, no questions asked. He wants to go back to the Dark Ages, a time where there was a complete stagnation in science, culture, and economic growth. But that doesn't matter, right? As long as he continues to gain power. Ultimately, Yarvin is nothing more than an accelerationist, wishing to hasten the timeline of the capitalist system to its ultimate goal. The elites owning everything, while everyone else is doomed to starvation. So what is our alternative to this end goal of capitalism? It seems like most of us can see the writing on the wall. A drastic change is coming, so how can the left make it work out for them? We have to continue having conversations with others, to get people out of their bubbles and smack the red pills they've been taking out of their hands. We have to get people off of Twitter, Fox News, the Daily Wire. This conservative propaganda is poisoning their minds. It's making them so conspiracy prone that they really think America is a communist country. The radicalization of the right continues to aid these corporate oligarchs into gaining more and more power. Social media has become a festering propaganda machine for the right. I mean, just take a look at your Facebook or Twitter feed to see what I mean. And it's so much more obvious than ever that Zuckerberg and Musk aren't hiding their MAGA loyalties. And until we can convince people that they're fellow workers, even the ones that are gay, black, trans, or women, have more in common with them and their interests than a group of billionaires, nothing is going to happen. Any kind of real change in living conditions for the working class is not going to come about through right-wing politics. And we have to show more people that the right wing is not the way to go. I hope you enjoyed the deep dive into this guy who's been consuming my thoughts for the past 2 weeks. I've been reading so much of his work and watching so many of his podcast appearances, and I really just needed to let other people know about him. And if you enjoyed the video, leave a like. If you'd like to continue the discussion, go ahead and leave a comment. And if you want to see more content like this, subscribe. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.